Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Amandine Flachs and today I am joined by Nana Parry, the co-founder and CEO of Tectonic, and we're here to talk about market and customer validation. So I do have a bunch of questions for Nana, but if you have any question, please be sure to leave a comment in the chat and I'll make sure to pass them on right now. So we are live on various platforms and whatever the platform you're using, be sure to ask your own question and to have the opportunity to ask us anything right now as we are live. Nana, I'm super happy to have you today. How are you doing?
Yeah, really well, really well. It's a very nice morning here, and yeah, I've been looking forward to jumping on the podcast for a while now. So yeah, happy we're doing it.
Me too. We had a chat a few months ago, I think, and since then, I always had in the back of my mind that we need to do something together.
Yeah,
But things happened, plus the current lockdown. Like everyone had to find out what was going to happen for them. So
yeah,
it has been kind of a difficult time. But I'm glad we find the time to eventually sit down, even if it's virtually.
yeah, for sure, definitely.
So, to get started, Nana, can you tell us a bit more about what you do, who you are, what Tectonic is, and
Mhm.
then we can deep dive a bit more into customer and market validation further down the line.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much for having me. So, my name's Nana Parry. I'm the co-founder of a company called Tectonic, and what we do is we help startups find out the exact needs of their current and future customers, and a lot of that is down to validating the assumptions that we have as startups when we're launching a new product. I've been an entrepreneur for about 8 years now. Quit my job. Well, it feels like a long time ago now. In a tech company, thought that I could go and try it myself. Had a bunch of things that didn't work. Some things that did. Raise some investment, etc. But I guess the general theme and the thing that I enjoy most is helping founders and startups figure out the best way to be successful. And a lot of that comes down to the validation piece, the customer validation piece, and hence kind of starting a company around that to make sure that people are building things that their markets need or their customers need, and not just is what in their head, in effect. So yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. And I was on your website the other day and something caught my eye. Also, you have a new website that looks really great.
Thank you.
Good to mention that, yeah, it's a brand new website. And I was there the other day and I saw something that kind of raised my attention. It says that you started Tectonic kind of by accident. So I was like, okay, I want to know more about that definitely. And
Yeah.
something else that I noted is that you said that you're trying to de-risk people's idea, and I really like this concept. So can you tell us a bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you the story of how Tectonic started. So we used to be called Metier Digital, and we recently rebranded in back in October. And basically, beforehand, I had a startup called Dubzu. It was a music startup, and it basically allowed musicians and music labels to use data to figure out where they should be spending their time and energy. Um, and I used to live in Denmark, in Copenhagen, and it was kind of an international year out. And I went to visit one of my friends in Morocco. And when I got to the Moroccan airport, I was detained for 2 or 3 hours with kind of no explanation, just passport gone, driving license gone. And I was kind of stuck in this room, not really sure what's going on, trying to figure out what's happening. And in the same vein, there was another guy there in a similar situation, and we ended up speaking. And he was from Egypt, and he was basically, we were finding out each other's stories, and he really wanted to diversify his current business, which was in kind of investment banking, to more digital and apps work. So he said, I really like you. We talked for 2 or 3 hours. He said, I really like you. I'm coming to London next week. I've got some money. I've got some app ideas. Let's do it. And I took it with a pinch of salt. I was like, yeah, sure. Kind of gave him my number. And fortunately, actually, the only reason I got out of the airport was because he was able to call someone that he knew that was able to kind of push us along in the process. Kept in contact, and then literally 3 days before, he said, right, he called me, I'm coming to London, I'm bringing one of my team members, let's do it. And I didn't have a team, basically. So we, over a few days, had to come up with a name, a website called Friends, Old Colleagues, to basically come together to build the initial version of his products. And that was how the company was born. And in the first meeting, a lot of the team were meeting each other for the first time at the same time as the client. And, you know, that client, he's still a client today. He just kind of loves what we do and loves what we bring to the table. And I think that was one of the kind of indicators that I knew that, yeah, this is the kind of stuff I love, just finding ways to solve your problem and delivering value.
I love that. I love this story. Like it is really by accident. Like it really
Yeah.
happened when you were detained. So that's so cool. What
Yeah.
about the other part? So the fact that your approach is de-risking the
Hmm.
people's idea, but also well businesses. Like starting a business is a big risk for lots of people. So what do you mean by de-risking this?
Yeah, sure. So I don't think it's a secret to maybe anyone watching or anyone in the startup world that, you know, the odds of building a successful company aren't large. Like most companies fail. That's the truth. So by the nature of it, it's risky. And one of the things that I took from raising money was that when I was in front of investors and I was speaking to them about, you know, trying to get them to invest in my business, it was very much, right, how do I remove as much risk as possible from this story so that, you know, when they feel on the basis that it's always going to be a risky investment, it's always going to be a risky thing to do. How do you just line by line remove things? And that can be the quality of your team, that can be the market that you're going into, that can be your own expertise, so many different areas. So and then as I got more and more contacts with venture capitalists and angel investors, their whole thing was about, you know, they recognize it's risky to invest, but how can you de-risk this for me as much as possible? Hence that kind of view of the best way I feel to de-risk ventures is at the end of the day, you're building a company to serve customers. You're trying to provide value for customers. And the best way to de-risk what you do is to actually speak to your customers and try and extract the data that allows you to understand what is it that they actually need, so you can implement that and therefore de-risk your own venture. But yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but it's I think it's a very, very important thing that we often overlook, in that this is a risky venture. We know it. We don't have all the answers. Our job is to de-risk this as much as possible, execute as best as we can.
I think you kind of gave a good definition of what what we mean by market and customer validation, because that's startup jargon. I mean, if you don't
Mm.
come or if you haven't spent years or lots of time immersed within the startup ecosystem, you arrive, you want to start a business, maybe you're a scientist or maybe you come from a very different background, you want to bring your expertise and you have a great business idea, and then everyone is telling you about business validation, market validation, customer validation, and you're like, what the hell, what's the difference,
Yeah,
what does this really mean? And
yeah.
I find it really hard to understand where to start really if you don't really get the wording first and what really
Mm.
is behind the concept. So I really like this kind of small definition, like short definition you gave earlier, talking about, you know, making sure that you're talking to the right people, to the right customers. Is there anything else to that? Is there anything that you need to get done before you start approaching your customers or before you start this phase of validation of the idea and the market?
Hmm. Yeah, I think there are a few things. So some of it is quite, I don't know if philosophical is the right word, but a journey that I had to take when starting the business was recognizing that I am separate from the business. So even though the idea might be mine or a group of ours, ultimately there's a really underestimated exercise of separating yourself from the business. So recognizing that you are looking at your business from a lens and it's not yourself. And the reason you do that is because you need to be able to objectively look at what you're doing and recognize that you are constantly making assumptions. So when, in my kind of previous startups, you kind of think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this solution existed? And then you're putting yourself in a solution mindset, not a problem mindset or solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And just that simple sentence of, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this thing existed? You're making maybe 15, 20 assumptions just in that sentence underlying. So by removing yourself from the business is one thing. And the second thing is recognize that you are making assumptions and be really honest with yourself about the assumptions that you're making about your business. So often entrepreneurs think it is sufficient that if they're solving a problem for themselves, they have the answers that they need to then go and build a company or start something. And I do think it's a good place to start when you're solving a problem for yourself, but you're not going to pay yourself for the business. The customer is not only you. So recognizing that is the problem, is the problem I'm trying to solve a solution for the target market is a question, but that assumption that you're making when you're starting to build the company is the problem that I am solving is a painful problem for my target customer. And there are so many assumptions in that space, and you just got to make sure you're writing all of those down. Oh, I think. Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry. While you were speaking, the quality on my end was degrading slightly, so I had to switch off my camera for you. So you can't see me, but we all see you. I'm sorry for that. I didn't want to interrupt you, but quality was dropping a bit. So that's the pleasure of being live.
Yeah.
But I was listening to what you were saying, for sure, and I completely agree with that. And I'm wondering, so you mentioned that people are quite often thinking, oh, maybe if this solution existed, it would make my life easier, so they start building it. But also I've seen a lot of very technical people also going into the approach thinking, oh, that would be so cool, not if we had that, but more if we were able to build something using this. And so they're trying to use a specific technology to make the most of it, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense. But they want it so much. And Eddie on the chat, my friend Eddie is doing lots of live stream, videos, and lots of things around developer relations also. And he's attending lots of hackathons. And he mentioned in the chat hackathons. And especially during hackathons, you see people trying to use a specific technology either because it is a topic of the hackathon or because they want to learn more about it. And at the end, they think there may be a business idea behind what they built because it's cool to use this tech and they really like the idea of doing something new.
Yeah.
But at the end, it's not necessarily the right approach, right? It's not the right way to do. How do you actually set aside this excitement for doing something that either passionates you or stimulates you from really looking at it from a business perspective and detaching you from the business? How can you actually do that? Are there any tips or any ways of helping you taking a step back from what you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, it took me a while. So when things, as in any business, when things aren't going well, it can be, you can make it feel like it's a reflection on yourself and what you're doing. But some of the things that helped me, first of all, just reflecting on what was done that day that was good and that was positive for yourself, and also what the business looks like today that was different to the day before. And the really valuable thing there is that one is a reflection on the actions that you take as the business owner, as the founder, as the team. But the other thing is what the business looks like in itself. So when you start doing that regularly, you're effectively separating. There's basically two stories. There's a story of the business owner and the founder, and there's a story of the business. And obviously they're linked emotionally. We can't pretend or completely remove emotion because it's a personal thing when you start something. But what helped me was getting into that habit of especially writing it down, not just thinking about it, writing it down, because when times are more difficult, you can go back and look at all the great things that you as an individual has done for the business, but also what the business is starting to look like, and getting that understanding of how your actions, your personal actions, influence what the business looks like, but your personal actions are not the business. So I would say that arguably the most important thing that I did was actually take time to reflect, especially when it's difficult to, and yeah, kind of make that differentiation between the actions of the personal and what the business starts to look like as a result of those actions.
It actually made me think of a situation I was recently in, where I was chatting with a few founders that had several ideas, kind of linked to the same topic or to the same industry, but they had different approach and different way of making it happen, and they didn't really know which one to go for. And they were asking me, "So, what do you think about my ideas?" And I was like, "Well, that's cool. It depends on what you want to do with that and where you want to bring it. It's not just about the idea itself." And they asked me, "So, for your startups, how did you know that it was the idea to go for?" I'm still in the very, very early days right now, and we haven't been public about what we're doing yet. But still, people ask me, and I was like, "Well, I don't know for anyone else," but I told her, for me, what I did is I had this idea with my co-founder, and then we didn't really first took it too seriously, and we were like, "That's cool." And then after a few weeks, we were still thinking about it, and after a few months, it was still in our head, and that's when we realized that, well, actually, maybe there is something here, because if it stick to your head, and if you can't just get out of it after months thinking about it, maybe there is something. So I completely get that about taking your time. I also see lots of misconception when it comes to testing if your idea could potentially be a good idea, where people are saying online, well, you need to spend £1,000 or £500, and you can actually test your idea with this amount of money.
Oh wow, I didn't know about these.
Well, I've seen a lot of blog posts like that, and I'm wondering, is this really a misconception? Do you really need to have a budget to test your idea, either it is to test just the idea or to test if there is a market for that?
So it's I think it's yes and no. So in terms of the actual testing the idea piece, the thing is, if you take those steps in terms of understanding that you're separate from the business and that you have assumptions and your goal is to validate those assumptions, one of the assumptions you will initially make is the problem that you're trying to solve and who your customer is. And the belief is that on our side is go and speak to your customers about that, but obviously recognizing that you're also making an assumption about who that customer is. So in terms of the activity of finding your target customer, obviously you can put in the time, the effort, the networking to go and find them, but depending on the type of business that you're starting, it might be very, very difficult to get access to a specific role type in an organization if it's B2B, or a specific type of consumer if it's B2C. So in terms of the effort required to go and test the idea, you don't necessarily need, loads of money to be able to start that process. But depending on how easy it is to access the target customer, or figure out from a market validation point of view if this is a problem worth solving, you may just have barriers when it comes to finding the people, or actually making sure that when you do go and speak to them, that you're not asking them questions that are going to lead you down a path where you kind of grab on to the thing that you want to hear, and you end up building a business, trying to build a business out of that. And I've definitely done that in the past as well, which we can kind of talk about separately, but we can come on to. But to answer your question, in terms of do you need lots of money to test the idea or to start to validate, you don't need that to start, but there are going to be particular barriers that you potentially may not be able to overcome for you to accurately validate. And then you may need to decide if you're going to put resources behind trying to do that before going straight into trying to build the product.
You mentioned that it is sometimes hard to reach out to someone from a specific organization, especially in B2B. Do you see lots of differences between B2B and B2C in terms of those first steps?
Not so much in the first steps, other than the speaking to the target customer. So, if you're a B2C business, the likelihood is that you're trying to, get thousands or hundreds of thousands of consumers to use or purchase your product, and you will have target profiles, but there's nothing particularly definitive about that decision making piece. And the reason I say that is because if you are building a HR software, you may need to speak to the head of talent acquisition within a specific demographic or type of business, and that potentially is more difficult to get to. So, in terms of the early steps, fundamentally, no. But some of the barriers, it's if you're doing a B2C business, depending on the profile of the consumer, it's normally they're normally more accessible to speak to than a decision maker in, I don't know, compliance or HR or a CEO, if they are the key decision maker when it comes to buying the software or understanding the problem that you're trying to solve.
And you also mentioned that you have to ask them questions, but in the same time, how can you trust what they're telling you? Like, if you ask a bunch of people if they would be interested in such a solution, I guess you can't just ask them straight away, oh, would you be interested in this? Because the
Yeah.
answer will always be yes. But then, are you going to pay for that? Then it might not be yes again. So how do you make sure that what they say is actually the true or representative from the space?
So I mean, it took us a few a few years, to be honest, to get to a process that effectively removes bias, or does its best to remove bias, and that's the that's the kind of red herring that we all need to be mindful of. I mean, sometimes it's very important for the founder or the business owner to be having these conversations, but they can also recognize that they're too close to it and need other people to come in and do that process, and that's where we try and help. But to answer to make sure that you're asking the right questions, I mean, there are UX researchers that spend their time and their careers figuring out how to extract the right pieces of data. But if you're not from a UX research background, there are some fundamental kind of steps you can take to make sure you're not asking questions like, would you pay for this, or do you like my idea? Which are obviously common questions that really don't help when you're trying to validate whether to go ahead or not. So there's a book called The Mum's Test. So some people may have heard of it that are listening,
I was
but
actually about to ask you about this because everyone is talking about this book, and I'm like,
yeah,
is it hype or is it really good?
yeah, no, it's really good. It's really
Okay.
really good. Rob Fitzpatrick is great, and I think he latched on to something that a lot of people weren't thinking about at the time. The whole concept of, do you like my idea, and thinking if 10 people say they like it, it's worth doing. But then when it comes down to the reality, if they're not purchasing it, then something is wrong. So when it comes down to asking the right questions, that's why that step at the beginning is so important, to remove yourself from the business and look at it objectively. But yeah, to make sure you're asking the right questions, you need to have your assumptions. You definitely need to have your assumptions. So if the assumption is, for example, is my business model, or the way that I make money, the appropriate way to charge my target customer? You don't ask questions like, hey, would you pay £70 a month for this make believe solution that I don't have yet? You'll ask questions such as, what are you paying? What software are you paying for now? What value does it provide you? Why do you continue to use it? These are all data points, but they're not direct, but you're able to use that data to actually figure out, is the business model appropriate? If the preference for the decision maker, or what's preferred for their business, is to pay a subscription model, then they say yes, I prefer subscription models. But when you actually ask them about the software that they're paying for, and they're actually, they're one year licenses, or they're not monthly, then there's a disconnect between those two. And it's your job to kind of look through the themes through the interviews that you're doing, to recognize that um, actually, if someone is saying something that's contradicted, if you see that theme all the way through, then you know there's an area to explore more before you start, building the business on a model that isn't necessarily what your target customer would pay for.
That actually brings me to a question we have on the chat from Lumjacker. Um, that is kind of related also. So Lumjacker asked two questions. So he says, there says, I have a startup idea, but I'm scared to share that idea with anyone because I feel like they will steal my idea. How do I
Mm,
deal with it? And the other question is college education required to build a successful startup? Which is
cool.
interesting because that's a theme that is coming again and again for in most live stream. Like, do you need a specific education? And
Mhm,
then I have this idea, but I haven't done anything yet with it because I'm just scared to go out there. Um,
mhm.
what do you think about that?
Yeah. So with the first question, my belief is that don't worry about sharing the idea. The reason I say that is because actually the idea, like the success of a business, is down to execution. It's really down to, are you able to execute on what you do better than your competitors? And obviously, in most markets, there's room in the market, so you don't necessarily have to be number one to reach your goals. You can be number four, number five, number 20, and still, and still be good. So I would say that it's actually very important to speak to your target customers, but it's actually best to not frame the conversation around your idea. So most of the time, if you're recognizing that you have assumptions and you're recognizing that you're trying to get information to figure out what's the best way for you to execute on your business idea, you may, most of the time, you actually don't need to reveal the idea and the solution in itself. You just have to ask the right questions to your target customer to then use those answers to help you figure out how you need to refine the idea, or maybe you need to keep it the same. But I would say that don't be scared to scare the idea, but ultimately, to get what you need, you don't actually necessarily need to share the idea in itself. Um, and the second question around, do you need a college degree to launch a startup? The answer is 100% no.
Yes.
I think that there are benefits, obviously, to having being a university student or having a college education. And for me, it was mostly speaking to people and understanding people from different backgrounds and building emotional intelligence. But you don't need a degree to do that. If you are out speaking to people, curious, interested in other people's backgrounds, in different concepts. And also, entrepreneurship is like a muscle, right? One of my really good friends from Google said to me, um, entrepreneurship is like a muscle. It's like you're going to the gym, and when you first go to the gym and you're using the equipment, it might hurt, it might be difficult, you might not get the technique right, but the more and more you do it, the better you become at it, and your muscles need to tear and rebuild as well, and you get a few scars from it, etc. So you don't need a college degree, you don't need a university degree to start a business. There are many successful entrepreneurs that have not even finished school. However, I think it's about self-awareness. It's about understanding who you are, what your needs are. There's nothing wrong with taking the time to go to university or go to college, or to work for someone else for some time to build some confidence and understand where you are. There's nothing wrong with that at all, but it's all down to self-awareness and kind of understanding what you need to feel comfortable and successful, but balancing that with not procrastinating and making sure that you understand that the best education is just doing it and just trying it and learning from it.
I couldn't agree more. I really love your answer because yes, a big yes. Completely agree with what you just said, and I love this idea of entrepreneurship being a muscle that you just train and grow over time.
Mhm.
Um, so we talked about different aspects of validating your business and your ideas. So what if you do all that and you identify your target audience, and you identify and you start talking to potential users of whatever you're building, of your startup. But what if you realize that actually it's not exactly what people want, and the results are a bit underwhelming? What happened? Are you immediately thinking about pivoting? Are you first trying to think, have I actually talked to the right people? What the approach if you identify that actually maybe what you're doing is maybe not the right approach, or just the results are just talking for themselves and it's not something people want?
Hmm. Yeah, so I think coming to the table with a problem that you're trying to solve or solution that you're trying to build in the first instance, and going through that validation process and speaking to your customers, you may find that if you do it the appropriate way and kind of remove yourself from the business, um, you might find that the problem that your target customer wants solved isn't the problem that you actually set out to solve. And then you have a decision to make as a business owner or as a founder. You can either spend more time digging into what that new problem that has arisen is, and you have a decision to make as into whether you decide to go and solve that problem instead of the problem that you originally set out to solve. You may not be passionate about that problem to solve, and that's okay. It's your decision. It's not you don't have to do that, but it's a choice. So I think that's the first step. And then the other part, which you rightly mentioned, is you have made an assumption about your target customer when you're going out and speaking to them. So you may find that through the data that you've amassed from that target customer, that actually there's another customer profile that actually is maybe more suited to the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you would look to pivot from a customer discovery perspective to understand whether that new target profile actually has a problem or has the problem that you're trying to solve. But what I would kind of encourage people to do is recognize that this whole thing is it's a series of choices, right? You don't have to go down any particular path. There are people that see the problem that they don't want to. Sorry, they go through the customer discovery process. They speak to target customers. They're not screaming out for in terms of the pain of the problem that you're trying to solve. But some people decide to just go anyway and try and educate people to recognize the problem. And that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, because entrepreneurship and starting your own business is so random in a lot of ways. But I think it's about a choice. And our choice would be follow the problem, follow the pain point. If you're trying to build a business, a business that generates revenue and profit and continues to grow, then choose the pain point, because it's much easier to sell people on solving a problem than it is on something else.
Before I ask you my next question, I just want to say hi to Luke and Eddie and Jacker on the chat. They have been also jumping into what we were saying just before about the profile of entrepreneurs. So Luke was highlighting the fact that many famous founders are dyslexic or have learning difficulties. And Eddie says that degrees are overrated, and that his degrees have not helped. So I don't know what Eddie, graduated in, but if you have learned all your technical skills by yourself, that's an impressive job. If it's not from your degree, but well done to you. And Ram says that he agrees, and degrees are a waste of time, but I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think well. Ram, I understand your point of view, but I think it all depends on the people and how confident you are. And you highlighted, Nana, you highlighted this really well. So I don't necessarily want to go too far into this topic because, well, we already mentioned that. But I think we shouldn't say necessarily that it's a waste of time. Let's say it is very useful for lots of people, and also when you're young you don't necessarily know where you want to go, so it's a great way of understanding what you want and going through this step of learning different things. So it's a good period of time, just to think about who you are, what you want to do, where you want to go. So it's not necessarily a waste of time. but it's not a box that you have to tick if you want to become an entrepreneur, or it's not a specific path you have to go through.
Exactly.
Um, Oh, but Ram says that the degree didn't help, but online courses did. So yes, online courses are also a great way for that. So we talked about lots of different area of validating an idea and a market, and talking to your customers, pivoting, which is a lot of things to take in consideration.
Mm.
Now, this is the we talk about the usual way of building a startup, but right now we are in a moment where all the usual rules are kind of all over the place,
Yeah.
because most cities are into lockdown.
Hmm.
There is a pandemic situation. Funding is also all over the place. People are a bit confused. Funders, so
Hmm.
investors are all super busy. They also try to bring everything remotely, which is okay to do, but they're just super busy right now. People looking for funding are super stressed about the future. So in this really uncertain situation and environment, are all those rules still applying, and how can founder continue to talk to their customers, validate their idea, and do all what we talked about, but in a different way, maybe?
Yeah, so I would agree with you that because of what's going on with COVID-19, um, the rules have changed, and it doesn't mean that uh, the whole world is gonna turn upside down, and we're never gonna go to offices again, and all offices are gonna shut down, for example. I don't think it's gonna be that extreme, but there's no doubt that the assumptions or the things that you actually knew about your target customer in terms of their characteristics, their behaviors, their spending patterns, that has changed. And I don't know if people are aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but you can, if you look at it, you can see that from a lot of the activity that consumers were exhibiting in the last couple of in the early weeks with COVID, you can kind of tell that needs and priorities are changed have changed. How long that goes on for is a different story, but there has to be a recognition that you can't continue to do things in a way as if this isn't happening.
Yeah.
I think the good news in terms of for entrepreneurs or founders is that we are best placed in terms of our personalities and our abilities to adapt and change. We're in the best place to actually recognize this and actually action it and do something about it. And when it comes to the validations piece specifically, one of the things that I've noticed in our business is that actually people are more uh, receptible to having conversations about about their market or themselves as customers, because they are working from home maybe, and they have a bit more time. They A lot of people are obviously still busy and adjusting to their working lives, but actually from an access point of view, for me this is the time to go and reach out to people and say, hey, we kind of recognize times are changing. It'd be great to get your perspective on how things are as the target customer. So I would say that don't assume that business isn't happening at all, funding isn't happening at all, your target customer isn't doing anything. Don't make that assumption. Still reach out, and arguably you're going to get more responses, especially if you lead with a message around solidarity and trying to be together and understand each other. Um, but yeah, back to the fact that things have changed. Things have changed, no doubt. And actually, whatever you understood about your target customer before all this has changed, and you need to put in the work to understand that, because you will
Yes.
end up building something that obviously wastes your own time and money, but also waste the time and money of the target customer that you're trying to provide for.
I completely, yes, completely agree. And I think also everyone is happy to help in this situation and work together and talk to each other. and also everyone is kind of looking for any social interaction.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
but in the same time, I feel that there is kind of a segmentation where if you're not into a specific group already, it's really hard to know how you get into this group. Like if you're not into a specific community that used to organize events offline and suddenly go online, create lots of discussions and a working group together. If you're not already into this community before the lockdown and before this situation, you don't really know that this exists. And that
Mhm.
brings me to Luke question. Luke on the chat is asking if there is a place for introvert founders in the startup world. So I feel that it's the same thing where if you don't go to events, if you don't get to talk to the people and talk to other founders, it's not necessarily about talking to your customers, but also talking to people who are in the same situation as you are. And
Mhm.
for that, I feel that right now it's a bit complex. Like you have more than ever online discussions, groups, and everything, but it's harder than ever to get to know about it and to get in.
Mm. Yeah, so I think first of all, with Luke, I am fully an introvert. So if you want to reach out after this, happy to talk about being an introvert founder. I don't know if there is a place for introvert founders. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but what I would say in my experience of classing myself as an introvert and starting a business is that it kind of comes down to the self-awareness piece that yes, I'm an introvert. I don't know if you know Gary Vaynerchuk, if anyone's heard of him, but he is a very extroverted communicator when it comes to business and social media and things like that. And especially if you are being coming from being brought up in the kind of the London startup community and looking to the States, it's very bolshy, it's very kind of extroverted in a sense. And
Yeah.
when you realize that actually there are many successful introvert, people that you would class as introvert. If you take Bill Gates, for example, he doesn't come across as, massively extroverted in
Mm-hmm.
his personality, but arguably Microsoft is the most resilient company in the world when it comes to change. But some of the things that have helped me when it comes to being an introverted founder is kind of accept it and recognize that yes, if you have to do um, pitches or speeches, like you might feel a bit more nervous
Mm-hmm.
about it, but it shouldn't stop you. Just feel it, do it anyway,
Yes.
and recognize that you just get better and better at it. But also making sure that you're doing things that are in your comfort zone. For example, I'm much more comfortable speaking kind of one on one with someone than I am, doing a presentation in front of thousands of people.
Mm.
That's something that I understand, and it's okay, and it's important for me to have conversations with you, Amandine, and other people on in this kind of forum because it's comfortable, but it's also really useful for people as well. So I think there's no one way to run a business. You don't have to be extroverted. You don't have to be introverted. It's about finding your own style that works for you and kind of using the outside world to help you navigate what's the best way for you to lead the organization and build the product that you want.
Completely agree. And indeed, there are lots of things in the startup ecosystem that you can take part of without necessarily being an extrovert. I mean, even if you're an introvert, you have to network at some point. You have to meet with people. So there are lots of different ways of doing it. And also, something with networking, I think that needs to be kind of said at some point is that it is awkward,
Yeah.
and people who are extroverts, and who are looked over by, or who are looked, when you're an introvert and you're looking at someone who is extrovert and you're like, oh, they're so lucky, I wish I could network like they do. Well, the
Mm,
thing is, they don't necessarily like it. I mean, when you go to a networking event, everyone is talking to each other, and lots of people don't necessarily enjoy it, but it's just the best way of doing it. And it's
mm,
always awkward to talk to someone. The first sentence you're going to say to someone is always weird. And you can see it with the body of the people. Like, if you look at the room, everyone is like doing something weird. Like, I do when
yeah.
I start talking to someone, like my
Yeah.
hands are in the hair, or I don't know, I start doing something just to acknowledge that yes, that's awkward, I'm going to talk to you, I have no idea what you're doing, who you are, but this have to happen. And
Hmm.
I feel that it's just about being okay with that. It's not about being introvert or being extrovert. It's more about just accepting the situation, and we are all doing different stuff, and maybe there are synergies, maybe they're not. It's still awkward if after a few minutes you realize that there is nothing in common with the person in front of you. It's
Hmm.
weird, but okay, that's fine, let's move on. and
Yeah.
and and also there are lots of online discussions, so if you don't feel like going out to events, or right now you can't go out to events,
Hmm.
then you can still, start introducing yourself to online communities. But it's just hard to find them, and I don't think there is one answer for that. uh,
Yeah, I think keep looking, just
yeah.
keep looking, just keep talking to people. Something will come up. And the thing that gives me comfort if I'm ever, feel nervous about doing something is Adele, the singer, has stage fright. And when I think about the fact that Adele, whose job
Yes.
is to literally go on and speak and sing to thousands of people, potentially millions if they're watching, and she accepts it, and then she goes out and does her thing and
Yeah.
does it amazingly. That's the same kind of story that I would take for I think for individual founders and entrepreneurs to also take as well.
Yes, and I would actually be worried if someone um, goes to a public speaking event, like they go on the stage and they are not a bit stressed. Like
Yeah,
lots of my
yeah,
friends that are super used to be speaking in front of a huge crowd, and they're like, every time someone asks them about how they can do that, they say, well, I'm always a bit stressed. I feel that it's also a proof that you care about what people
yes.
think, how people can react. Are they
Mhm.
going to enjoy it? Is it going to be the right audience? Is what I'm saying right for those people and interesting for them? So I think that
Mhm.
it's important to be a bit stressed before anything, because it shows that it's actually not something you do because you used to do it, but you actually care about what you're saying and the value you're bringing. So it's not bad. I mean, everyone has that, and just make the most of it, turn it into a strength. We have actually lots of messages on the chat. So hi to everyone. I'm not sure I have said hi to everyone, but welcome everyone. So Janvier, who was on my stream a
Oh yeah,
few months ago, yeah, he says amazing chat. Thanks for doing this, and he's turning in with a cup of coffee. So get
nice.
comfy, and I'm glad you're here today. Um, we have also Ram, who asked me to thank you for all your tips and sharing all your knowledge, because he has lots of respect for you, and he thinks you're doing a great job and inspired him. So
Oh,
that's a
thanks.
great to hear, really. I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And we have also Luke saying that he prefers also one-to-one chat, um, like with us right now, like with
Mm.
live stream. And I think live streaming is also a great thing for that, to have this conversation and open knowledge without being in a huge crowd, having to be out there. You can be in your pajamas and just join the discussion with people you don't know
Yeah, exactly.
anywhere in the world.
100%. Love it.
If you have any further question, anyone, please check out the chat, and feel free to add your question. I'm checking my own question right now.
Hmm.
Yes, on the question of the lockdown and the current situation, someone asked me on a Twitter DM yesterday, what if you just launch your business before the lockdown, didn't expected it, and you are just after your launch, so your post idea, post preparation, you already are out there. It is
Hmm.
launched, but now there is a lockdown and it may have a big effect. So, how do you kind of de risk the effect of the lockdown? And also, how do you reach your customers in this current environment? Is there anything else you can do if you're already well public about what you do, already trading, and you're like trying to reach people,
Hmm.
your customers right now?
Yeah. So to the first part, I think if you've just uh, launched, and I would say just launched, basically meaning you've just literally released your product and you're trying to get some traction. I think the first thing is to not panic. It doesn't mean that your business or your idea is totally irrelevant, but you have to accept that that things have changed. So
Yes.
on the assumption that you have operational costs, so on the assumption that you're spending money, either you're taking a salary or you're spending money on software and things like that, they say cash is king, and it's 100% true. You need to look at what you're currently spending and figure out what is absolutely necessary and strip out anything that isn't, because ultimately a business only lasts as long as its ability to have cash in the business is there. So I think that's a really important step to take. And that's, again, going back to that original thing I said about removing yourself from the business. If you do that, you're going to be able to look objectively about what the needs are and the goals are of the business. I think the second thing is coming back to what we were saying before around the fact that accepting that things have changed and understanding that your customer has changed as a result. Use the time to find your target customer, either people that are maybe interested but haven't actually committed to use the product, or people that you would normally reach out to. Don't I think the whole kind of selling, super strongly, really outwardly is going to be a lot more difficult now. So actually, even if you are trying to sell, lead with a conversation, trying to understand more about them and their needs and seeing if they fit, because worst case, you're just going to get back some information and some data that will allow you to learn more about how these changes have occurred in your target customer. So I would say that. And in terms of reaching out, obviously, with no more face-to-face contact, or significantly reduced, as you said, there are lots of online communities, but I find LinkedIn is great for it. I really find that target, like finding someone based on their role and writing them a message or trying to connect, and just saying things like, I just want to connect with people in this time and try and understand kind of what's happening in the market. People are really, really receptive to that. And speak to those kind of future customers, but also people, if they're already using your product, also speak to them as well. But I would say, as in terms of tools, LinkedIn is one that has really, really helped me. And Twitter is also great for conversations as well. And there's this final piece, which is kind of be kind to yourself while all this is going on, because it's very easy to just be like, oh, I've been working on this for so long and it's not working, and now this thing has happened, etc. Everyone is trying to navigate this very, very strange time. So if you are, confused, ask for help. Basically, this is the time to ask for help if there's any time, and not being shy about it, but also not feeling that at all costs this business has to exist through this time, especially if you're making like a digital product or something like that. You can use this time to get data from your target customers and from the market, and then decide to relaunch or spin things up when you have a bit more of an understanding. There are no rules in this time. There are definitely none. So it's about asking people for help, getting advice, and doing what works for you.
You also hosted an office hour, I think
Mm,
last week, and for what I understand, on your communication online, you're planning on doing that regularly, right?
yes. Yeah.
So,
Yes.
what are the major worries from founders that you've seen recently, or the questions that are coming again and again during this type of office hours?
Yeah, so interestingly, the two key themes are, I was either or I have a business that is involved in networking, in effect, face-to-face networking. And now I have to bring the whole thing online. Either should I start it, or should I wait? Or how do I actually take the steps to bring it online? That's been a big theme. And the second one is, how do I know when to launch, in effect, or how do I figure out how to sell what I'm doing and charge people for what I'm doing. So those latter two are very common. I think they happen, pre-COVID, post-COVID. All those questions are going to be there, but the one that's very relevant to the time we're in is, I have a face-to-face type business. I need to bring it online. How do I go about doing that? And should I even go about doing that right now? That's generally a common theme. And yeah, we're going to continue doing them. We do them every Wednesday now between 3:30 and 5:30,
Mhm.
and one of the team, either myself or one of the team, will be there to kind of help people for half an hour to answer some of those questions.
Talking about the team,
Mm.
Dan just earlier followed the channel on YouTube. So huge thanks to Dan for your follow on YouTube. Dan is your brother, right? And your
Yeah,
co-founder.
Dan's my brother and co-founder. We've been working together for years now. We've also got Joshua as well, who's our validation lead.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just the whole, actually just want to shout out the whole team because there's 8 of us kind of part-time, full-time, a mixture of part-time and full-time. And they've just been absolutely fantastic
Mm-hmm.
through this period. And, you know, there's a huge benefit to working with people that
Yes.
you have the understanding and the energy, and you're all pulling in one direction.
Mm-hmm.
It's really really valuable to have. So yeah, just big shout out to the team for being them and kind of putting up with me in general.
That's so true. If there are some people you can rely on during this situation, is definitely your team. It's important to right now talk to them, make sure that they're okay, but also relying on them and making sure that you can trust them and talk to them if you have any doubt or anything. It's so important that the people who can support you the best. You can of course join chats online and discussions and WhatsApp groups, but the team is going to stay after the situation. So that's the people you need to take care of also.
100%, 100%. Couldn't agree more.
We mentioned earlier some books. So we mentioned the Mom Test. You said
Yeah.
it was a good book, not just the hype, but a good book
Yeah.
to read. Do you have also other resources, maybe blogs or Twitter accounts or anything you would recommend people to follow to learn more about the topic, or just
Mhm.
that are must read for you?
Yes. So I don't remember the author's name, but the book is called Hacking Growth. Dan,
Mm-hmm.
if you're listening, you might be able to put it in the chat. But that's a um, really good book around how try part of the validation piece, but also how to rapidly
Mm-hmm.
test things and ideas. Um, there's also the obviously the Eric Ries, the Lean Startup one, kind of the basis of a lot of customer validation um, and what we do. Um, I would also say a book I really like by the founder of Basecamp called Rework. Um,
Yes.
it's yeah, I really liked their take on running a business because a lot of people believe that you have to be this unicorn or you have to have a initial public offering IPO or something to be seen as successful, but actually there's a lot of benefit in just bootstrapping the business as
Mm-hmm.
much as you can before deciding to take investment. And just generally how they operate their business I find really fascinating. It goes massively against what a lot of the startup culture tells you, and I really enjoyed that as well.
I think it's actually a wrong thing that the ecosystem is pushing everyone, or pushing everyone to think that raising money through investors is a successful thing. I mean, it's a great path, and if you can, and if you have a business that is right for the VC model, good for you, but then it's not because you have raised a seed round or a series A that means that you are a super successful entrepreneur. That just means that your business was right for that and you managed to raise money to go to the next step. But if you can actually get money and generate revenue, or push back as much as you can the investment from external investors, then I feel that's even better. But people
Mhm.
don't necessarily celebrate that. They celebrate external funding, VC
Yeah.
round, and that's a shame because there is so much more than that in the success of a company. I mean, it
Yeah,
should be also celebrated in some ways.
yeah. I mean, I have so much to say on this topic. So I'll try and be succinct, but I 100% agree with you. Raising money is not success. You need to understand your own business and where you want to take it to, and only you can define what success looks like.
Mhm.
And some people will need investment to get to those goals, and that's fine. And to anyone that does raise money uh, in the process or in the journey of achieving those goals, it's amazing. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's not the only way to do it. Most businesses are not suited for the VC model, and even VCs recognize that most of their investments are going to fail. They're banking on the one or two to prop it up. So I would say it is about the journey of the entrepreneur. For Tectonic, we went 3 years, no investment, just sales, just growing organically, growing slowly through sales. And it was an investor that approached us in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then it made sense from a partnership point of view because we had to make sure that the partner that we received investment from, Cornerstone, were aligned with what we do. And it's just a much easier conversation when they're coming to you because this is the deal, this is what it is. We're already revenue generating, we're already making profit, we're already showing value. This is where we want to go. Do you believe in that journey? And that conversation is a lot easier than, can I have some money to test it?
Yes.
And even though that's needed for some ideas, I would encourage people to take the metrics of revenue or users or value first before thinking about that journey, even if it's a small amount, because it's going to help with your journey so much.
Yes, definitely. And also, it's interesting. I've seen more and more VCs also trying to find another way to fund those type of businesses that don't really work for the VC model. Like
Mm-hmm.
yesterday, I think it's Forward Partners who announced a new kind of a new fund to help startups without taking any equity. So it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a loan system where it's more revenue
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 share or
slip.
something?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So you share revenue, so they give you money, and then as soon as you have revenue, they take a cut on that. And I find this model quite interesting for founders who want to not give up their equity. And I feel that services are more and more open to
Mm-hmm.
find a way to work with businesses that are successful but not falling into the path of the usual VC money, or may not want to or need to. They have other needs, but still need cash, but not necessarily for the usual VC model. So I think it's quite encouraging that investors also recognize that and don't just think about what interests them and what works with their own model, but also try to think about how to be involved in other ways and in other type of businesses.
A hundred
Ho-
percent. Yeah.
Hopefully, we will see more of those in the coming
Yeah.
months and
Ripe for
years.
disruption in this space. I'm still, yeah, I think there's still a lot of opportunity to figure out other ways to fund ambitious founders and startups that aren't in the taking a piece of equity of their business.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
I want to say thank you to Dan for sharing the name and the author of the books you mentioned. So you mentioned Hacking Growth. It's from Morgan Brown and Sean Ellis. So
John
thanks,
Ellis,
Dan,
that's
for
it. Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Nana, before we wrap up, do you have any other points you want to mention? Anything that you maybe wanted me to ask you about, or anything you want to add?
No, I think it's been really, really good, really, really comprehensive. I think just the final thing that I would say is kind of on the validation and the customer interview piece. Um, I think as founders and business owners, we recognize that we should be doing it,
Mm-hmm.
and often we're not. And I think, and I think that's just the reality. And
Yes.
I would really encourage people uh, to not excuse themselves from having those conversations because they believe that they have all the answers. You would be massively surprised at what you learn from having 10 conversations with target customers, and it could
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally change your business and lead you to success. And just again, recognizing that in this time, yes, things are messed up, there are no rules. Your customer yesterday is not the same customer today from a behavioral and characteristics point of view. Recognizing it, accept it, but also know that there's so much opportunity now to um, to build a successful business. So many stories of very successful businesses coming out of difficult times. So remembering that, push on, ask for help, and yeah, just good luck.
Good luck, exactly. Thank you very much, Nana. I'm going to stay on the stream for a few minutes, so if anyone wants to talk further about this topic or want to talk about their week, because it's super important to just remote socialize right now, so I'll stay on the stream for a few additional minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But huge thanks to you, Nana. It was
Yeah,
such
thank
a
you.
pleasure to have this discussion with you. I definitely, well, we keep keep in touch with you in the coming weeks because I really love what you're doing for founders, and I will definitely promote your upcoming office hours. You also have a podcast that you're hosting called
Every day.
Everyday Startups, right?
Yeah. We've got a podcast called Everyday Startups. Yeah, speaking to really interesting businesses in AI, blockchain, but also speaking to entertainers about how the parallels of starting a business or running a business linked to what we do. So yeah, really really good stuff. So yeah, Everyday Startups is what it's called, and I also have a podcast called Founders Clinic with Andy Ayin,
Yes.
where we're in season 2. We're going to be talking to VCs about the challenges they have raising their own funds. So I think that'll be a really interesting perspective for founders as well.
I look very much forward to this. Yes, right. I forgot about this one with Andy. Andy is also doing lots of fantastic stuff in the scene.
Yeah.
So if anyone, well, especially in the London community, check out what Andy is doing. Check out Everyday Startups, and lots of so many resources, so many great people doing so many great stuff. You want to give a shout out to everyone, but you can't just think of everyone.
Yeah.
But huge thanks to you, Nana. I wish you a fantastic weekend ahead, and we'll speak very soon.
Amazing. Thank you, Amandine. Speak soon. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye.